Hi, and welcome to The Pill. Um, this is my weekly art criticism podcast, and this week we're going to discuss this new trend of huge fashion shows in the main museums. We're talking about the most prestigious museums, like in the New York Alexander McQueen at the Met, then Punk and Chaos with Vivienne Westwood, and um, and now the Alexander McQueen show is coming to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and um, and I have to say that it seems that museums and art people find themselves having to like justify um, their place in the museum. I'm saying this because I just received the press release for the V&A exhibition next year, the Alexander McQueen, and the tone of it makes me think that something is happening with the museums that no one is really thinking. So I think this is a good opportunity to think it together. So welcome to The Pill. A couple of weeks ago, I received the press release of the Alexander McQueen Savage Beauty exhibition, which is coming to London March 14 to July 19th next year. Of course, there is nothing new in the exhibition, which is basically a repeat from the Metropolitan Museum in New York. What I found surprising is the tone that Art Forum chose to promote this artistic event. It said, "You can buy a ticket from 10 a.m. tomorrow morning." After countless spurious rumors that it would, and even a campaign to ensure it did, the V&A announced tonight that it will host the exhibition from March 14th to July 19th. The collection, which covers the spectrum of McQueen's career, from his 1992 MA graduate show to his unfinished autumn-winter 2010 collection, was originally displayed in New York Metropolitan Museum from May the 4th to August the 7th. Its runtime was extended by a week due to popular demand, and it became the 8th most popular show in the Met's 141-year history, behind Treasures of Tutankhamun 1978, Mona Lisa 1963, and Picasso 2010, boasting a total of 661,000 visitors. Then Vogue quoted the museum authorities in the following way, and I'm quoting Vogue: "I'm thrilled to announce that the V&A will bring this wonderful exhibition to London to celebrate the extraordinary creative talent of one of the most innovative designers of recent times." Martin Roth, director of the V&A, said to Vogue. And then he said, "Lee Alexander McQueen was brought up in London, studied here, and based his globally successful McQueen fashion brand here. By staging the exhibition at the V&A, it feels like we are bringing his work home." Immediately after this, one could read, "Savage Beauty is a storytelling of the most imaginative and talented designer of our time," added Jonathan Akeroyd, chief executive officer of Alexander McQueen, the company. And he added, "We are incredibly proud as a house to be able to showcase Lee's visionary body of work in London as a celebration of his legacy and an inspiration to a future generation." Curated by the V&A Senior Curator of Fashion, Claire Wilcox, the London exhibition will be based on the original Met version, with Andrew Bolton, who worked on the New York exhibition and is originally a curator at the V&A, acting as consultant curator for the London exhibition. Supported by American Express and put on in partnership with Swarovski, it will cost £16 to visit. I would like to discuss here what is the role of fashion into the crisis not only of contemporary art but also of the institution of the museums, and how and why we got to consider this as art. Last year, it took place at the Metropolitan Museum the show Punk, Chaos to Couture, curated by Andrew Bolton, who is a working-class gay guy trying to make it into the arts and fashion New York elite. Sorry, it's not a working class, it's a middle-class British in trying to make it into the super-rich New York elite. Their immediate antecedents to this show at the Metropolitan was the Chanel show, also at the Met, where Karl Lagerfeld tried to displace Coco Chanel from history and ended up falling out with Met's former director, Philippe de Montebello, who does not know anything about these issues and should not really be getting involved into this sort of debate. So why this debate was taking place? In the organization of both shows, it was interesting how curator Andrew Bolton seemed to blindly obey Met's trustee and Vogue editor Anne Wintour, who seems to have dictated the museographic way of exhibiting the clothes at Punk Chaos de Couture and at the Met. This is not new because before her, Diane Freeland, the legendary editor of first Harper's Bazaar and then Vogue, opened that space for the fashion world at that level of blockbuster um, celebrity. So I decided to go back to where Andrew Bolton, the curator of all these shows, started to discuss how the Victorian Albert Museum and the Metropolitan showcases fashion as art. The result had been, to say the least, confusing, and one has the impression that neither Bolton nor the V&A really have art in mind and let the place of scholarship to be increasingly occupied by the market. In other words, these fashion shows, Punk at the Met or McQueen at the V&A, push their showrooms from the high street into the museum. But what benefit does it bring to them, to the museums? What's the purpose of this? When one goes to see the permanent fashion collection at the Victorian Albert Museum, one can see that there it is presented as the unfolding of the representation of social history, more specifically linked to the technological advances in fabrics and weaving techniques. This is the case for 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries until the 1990s, when this social history approach is dropped in order to canonize an artistic approach. All of a sudden, I mean, basically, when one goes to the V&A, what one sees is that design as art started in the 80s. Showing two suits by Comme des Garçons, its designer Kawakubo seems to give us a rationale for the fashion into art. And I'm sorry to say, but it is difficult to see the art. In his signage, Kawakubo says, playing it safe is a risky business. So it is about taking risks for business? It is about the new for novelty's sake? Is that what art had become? Are we talking about Charles Saatchi and the YBA's idea of art as shock? Or as an objectual arrangement that provokes a reaction of surprise and wonder in the receiver or in the viewer? Is that what art is for these people? This is entertainment, but never art as an expression of humanity and its potential. This is even more clear when in the last window of the room, the V&A nominates an equivalent for the collector that shocks like Charles Saatchi. Basically, what they do is at the end of the museographic narrative at the V&A, they kind of invent, they make up a Saatchi of sorts, but for fashion, in the person of Mark Reed. Apparently, Mark Reed, who is nostalgic of the gentlemanly flamboyant look of the dandy, had been buying the most outrageous pieces from the catwalks in London and Paris, and consequently wore them in social events. So, is this Saatchi of fashion shaping fashion through flamboyance? At this point, the history of fashion that the V&A shows does not seem to agree on whether flamboyance is the chicken or the egg. Having said this, the rationale behind high fashion seems to be so circular that does not allow the V&A to even include it in its social history. This is why their curators, I believe amongst them Andrew Bolton, who is responsible for the Punk Chaos to Couture exhibition at the Met, and also is going to act as an advisor at the Alexander McQueen at the V&A, they decided to call this unexplainable post-modernity of fashion as art. So there's a point where these curators decide, with the help of the companies, of the management, that this is art. We can see that the museum of today has not become a department store, but it readily employs the techniques of advertising to stage not only controversial fashion shows, exhibitions, but also art in the best possible light. An institution that increasingly resembles the theater by its changing repertoire favors the sensational mise-en-scène. It is also tends to resemble a free trade zone, where the price is recognition for recognition's sake. This is impregnating the way art is showcased at museums. In other words, instead of serving a broader public with a more liberal selection of art, the museum finds itself in the hands of that public. The museum stopped leading, stopped creating culture. The one-time oasis for aesthetic experience that the modernist museum used to be, that shrine, has now become the stage for the public's self-experience. Now the latter has lost any other occasion but such desires. Museum art no longer continues as a privilege, an alternative species after the museum no longer resists this access of every possible art. Today museum art can be anything, because anything can stand or hang in a museum. Or not hang, as we saw last week with Marina Abramovic. The museum are submissive even to the least suitable private collections, whose use is dictated by the sponsor. That is why Anne Wintour dictates what the Met has to say about fashion, no matter her commercial involvement in the industry. This is outrageous and jeopardizes the notion of cultural history. However, I think that this intrusion of the market that we can so clearly see in fashion also happens in a subtler way in the art that is exhibited there. In other words, in today's museums, the kind of art that is consecrated are commodities that are simultaneously traded at the art fairs. Institutions and events help in where art as such no longer appear to be convincing on its own terms. Enforced mediation is called for support the former prestige of a weekend art. For a variety of reasons, society depends on a culture of privilege and is therefore determined to give art credit whether it deserves it or not. So what is the boom in museums construction all about if we do not even know what to put in museums? I would say that the two demands that the theater of art of today satisfies these days through a museum are the need for information on one hand, and on the other, the desire for surprise. The need for information is the other side of the coin of complete ignorance about art, and art history that the public has today. So today, the public goes without knowing about art, so it expects to be taught about art, but very quickly. The kind of knowledge that the museum provides today is only composed by assertions and with words intended to substantiate those claims. There's no time for explanations, they have to be assertions. The usual rituals of art gain all the more weight the less the public feels informed. These rituals surprise the public with the pleasure of an exhibition that replaces the uncertain pleasure of what is being exhibited. Most importantly, art and fashion in museums bring about a new style of exhibiting that answers the public desire for spectacle with a type of entertainment which the media are less and less capable of providing. People used to visit the museum or see something that their grandparents had seen on the same spot. Today people visit museums to see what has never been seen there before. The novelty of a recently dead 40-something designer, like Alexander McQueen, taking over the most important art museum in the world is an example of this. At the same time, the museums invite their visitors in an audio-visual environment where they are shut off from the outside world and in a dark cell-like compartment may experience the same intimacy as in front of the television at home. It is a kind of screened environment that we allow to capture our distracted gaze for a while. In today's exhibitions, people that cannot concentrate force themselves to concentrate through a cue and ritual of looking at an object. The museum as a site for our imagination has replaced the temple-like site of education it once embodied. Simultaneously, it aims at its embodied space experience that is familiar from a television screen on which mere images pass in succession and cancel each other out. Thus, even when entering a museum, we expect a room quite different to the space of the museum. First, where fashion, now Abramovich just hangs around and calls it performance. In other words, the museum has become a railway station for the departing trains of the imagination instead of remaining the destination of a pilgrimage to the sanctuary of art. This is why performance art and installation come so handy. The question is, what is art and what is fashion? And where is the line between the two of them? This was The Pill. See you next week.